At its height, Genghis Khan's rule covered more land than most of us can imagine, a sweep of sky and grass from one horizon to the next. Tonight, we'll drift across that same windswept steppe, the endless grassy plains, like the American Midwest stretched out forever, and listen to the soft, steady rhythm of hooves and hearthfire. You'll learn how a boy born into a nomad family, nomad meaning someone who moves with their animals, like a shepherd who packs up and follows the seasons, became the leader who united scattered tribes into an empire, which is simply many lands ruled together, like one person running a whole neighborhood of towns. Along the way we'll slow down to the small, human moments, tents pitched at dusk, tea shared by lamplight, a map drawn in the dirt. Those details make history feel close, like a neighbor telling a story over a cup of tea. There are simple lessons woven through these tales, about loyalty, clear choices, and moving quickly when needed. Think of them as leadership tips you could use in a group project, just with more horses and fewer spreadsheets. A little humor keeps us warm too. Strategies were often decided over jokes and a stubborn sense of direction, not by polished speeches. So settle in, breathe slowly, and let the wide, quiet sky of the steppe carry you. We'll follow a path from campfire to coronation, soft and sure, until sleep arrives like a gentle night wind. The whisper of the steppe. The wide grassland shaped people as much as they shaped it, teaching habits that would become the backbone of an empire. Nomadic life meant constant movement, portable homes, herds that supplied food and transport, and a daily rhythm set by seasons and grazing. A gur, the round felt tent, was not just shelter but a workshop, kitchen, and social center all in one, quick to fold up and move, like a home that can hitch a ride. Horses were everywhere, not rare trophies but tools and companions, small by some standards yet incredibly tough, able to trot for hours while carrying a person and a pack. Young riders learned balance and patience from day one, which built a calm confidence useful in crisis. Scouts read the land the way a sailor reads the sea, footprints, broken grass, the way birds move, all of that spoke messages. Communication moved fast along those whispering plains because people trusted signals and knew how to send them. Messengers, relay posts, and a system of clear commands made information travel quicker than gossip at a village market. Oral tradition kept laws, stories, and strategies alive. Memory and speech mattered as much as ink. Codes and rules were enforced so that a large, shifting group could act like a single well-oiled machine. Think of it like a team sport where everyone knows the plays and follows the coach without arguing at halftime. Discipline meant order. Order meant that when a decision came, it was carried out cleanly. The steppe's quiet taught stealth and timing. Feigned retreats, sudden charges, and the ability to vanish into tall grass were techniques born from living where concealment and speed win fights more often than sheer numbers. Supplies were practical and flexible. Dried meat, fermented milk, and animals used on the hoof meant armies could move without long baggage trains. That's a lot like camping with a smart menu: eat what you carry and don't waste time carrying refrigerators. Friends and enemies both learned to listen to the land. Snow-choked passes, river fords, and grazing routes were talked about as carefully as weather forecasts. Such knowledge decided where people settled for winter and where armies could cross without getting stuck. Simple habits, knowing which valleys hold water, which ridges hide ambushes, turned into strategic advantages. Even today, understanding your surroundings can save time, money, and the occasional bad mood. At night the steppe kept its soft voice, whined through felt, the quiet nick of a horse's hoof, a distant call. Those small sounds taught patience and a kind of elegance in survival, where smart choices outshone brute force. A little humor helped too. You had to laugh when your whole house tipped into the dirt during a blustery morning, and then right it again. Practical, steady, and surprisingly human, that whisper from the grass was both a lesson and a lullaby, shaping leaders and ordinary people alike. Roots in nomadic life. Life on the wide grasslands turned animals into the center of daily life rather than fields or factories. Families moved with their herds to find fresh grass, pitching round felt tents that could be taken down in minutes, like a modern camper packing for a road trip but with fewer snacks and more hoof prints. Many households kept horses, sheep, goats and cows, and most work, cooking, mending, guiding, happened outdoors or at the mouth of the tent. This constant movement taught people to pack light, to fix things quickly, and to read weather and landscape in ways that city maps cannot capture. Horses mattered above almost everything. Children learned to ride while still small, balancing on a moving animal as if it were a bouncing playmate. A horse was transport, refrigerator, and alarm clock all in one. It carried people and goods, provided milk that was fermented into kumis, and alerted a family to predators or strangers. The combat skills that later mattered in wider conflicts grew out of these everyday habits. Shooting accurately from a moving horse, for example, was just a practical way to hunt and herd. Think of a horse as the original all-terrain vehicle. It never needed a mechanic, just hay. Social bonds and flexible leadership came from shared hardship. Kinship and clan ties kept people safe when winters were harsh and raids came. At the same time, leaders were often those who proved themselves useful, brave in a fight, shrewd in negotiation, or generous with supplies. Decisions were made out loud, around fires or in gatherings where older voices carried weight but skill could tip the balance. It's like a neighborhood meeting where the person who brings the most useful tools also gets to steer the project, except the tools might be a spare saddle or a clever grazing plan. Daily life rewarded practicality and quick thinking. Making a felt wall for a tent, patching a leather boot, or turning a rawhide rope into a harness were ordinary crafts practiced by many. Nobody waited for specialists. This made communities adaptable, able to move on a day's notice and survive in thin places where settled farmers would find it hard to live. There was humor in the toughness too, complaints about cold, about a stubborn foal, or about someone who ate the last bit of dried meat could be sharper than a winter wind, and laughter followed fast. Small skills, learned in the dust and the dawn, laid the foundation for larger ambitions. Early years of Temujin. Temujin came from the Borjigin clan and was the son of a minor chieftain named Yasujii and a strong-willed mother, Holun. His birth name is often linked to iron, a hint at the toughness people later saw in him, and some stories say there was an omen at his birth, a blood clot in his hand, though that part belongs more to legend than to straightforward record. He grew up learning the routines of steppe life, horse care, hunting, and the rhythms of moving with a nomadic family. Those early lessons mattered because they were practical skills. They kept people fed and alive, which is a pretty solid education if you think about it. Life changed quickly when his father was killed by rival Tatars, and the family lost the protection that came with a chieftain's household. The clan left them without support, and suddenly Temujin's childhood had very little in common with the usual comforts of a leader's son. Hunger and exposure became part of daily life. His mother Holun became the household's chief teacher. She taught him to skin animals, make tools, and persuade others to share what they had. In modern terms, it was like a child losing a parent's job and having to learn budgeting, cooking, and how to ask for help, only with wolves nearby instead of electricity bills. Holun's lessons emphasized resilience and resourcefulness more than schoolroom lessons ever could. As a young man he was captured and enslaved by rivals for a time, an experience that left its mark. He escaped and began building his own following by giving people reasons to stay with him, fair shares of spoils, rewards for loyalty, and the promise of protection. He made a pact of blood brotherhood with Jamuka, a childhood friend, which later turned into rivalry, showing that alliances on the steppe were both personal and political. He learned early that trust could be created by deeds, not just by birthright. That mattered because in a landscape where might could change hands quickly, people followed leaders who proved they could get things done, whether that meant winning a skirmish or finding a fresh watering hole for the herd. Marriage to Borte was arranged when they were both young, and her later abduction by a neighboring clan forced Temujin to assemble allies to win her back. That rescue was a turning point. It taught him the value of alliances beyond immediate kin and showed how swift, coordinated action could change the outcome of a crisis. He recruited help from reform-minded chiefs and from those he had treated well, building a reputation that attracted fighters and blacksmiths, cooks and scouts. In everyday life, it's not unlike pulling together friends and colleagues to help you move house, except the stakes were higher and the rewards could include land and loyalty rather than just pizza and beer afterward. All these early hardships shaped how he led. Merit and loyalty mattered more than noble birth, and practical competence trumped empty titles. Simple rules guided him: share the spoils, reward bravery, and punish betrayal harshly. Humor aside, it's a leadership lesson that holds up whether you're running a small startup or a nomadic band. People will follow someone who gives them a future that looks better than their present, and Temujin learned to make that future tangible through actions rather than promises. Survival, loss, and vengeance. As a child on the open grasslands he learned the simplest rules that keep people alive: how to ride before he could run, how to read the sky for weather, and how to find water when the land looks empty. His father, a tribal leader, was reportedly poisoned while away. The family was then abandoned by their clan, and they were left to scrape a living from the steppe. Those facts shaped him. Survival meant knowing animals as well as people, and trusting only a few. He learned to hunt with traps and to mend a torn saddle without a tool kit. Small, practical skills kept his family fed and moving, the kind of everyday resourcefulness people still use when they have to move cities or rebuild after a flood. Loss arrived like harsh winter. The family's standing vanished, and that collapse left a long shadow: hunger, exile, and the kind of humiliation that imprints a young mind. He was captured and briefly enslaved by a rival group. His future wife was kidnapped and taken by another tribe, a wound that demanded action. These are not abstract tales. They are the same sequence seen in many lives today when someone loses a job, a home, or a loved one and must start over, only his remaking was on the scale of clans and alliances. Losing trust in the wider world made him tighten bonds with those who stayed loyal. That human reaction, clinging to the circle that helped you when everything else fell away, is as ancient as tents on the steppe and as modern as leaning on family after a layoff. When vengeance came, it was layered. At first it looked like personal retribution, rescuing his wife and punishing those who had humiliated him. But it quickly became organized and strategic. He built alliances the same way people today build networks, by offering protection, sharing spoils, and rewarding loyalty with a clarity that was almost businesslike. He also used the steppe's long-standing custom of blood vengeance, the idea that an affront deserved repayment, to rally supporters. Instead of random fury, he turned anger into policy. Enemies who resisted were crushed, but many who surrendered were spared and integrated. In modern terms, it's like a leader who responds to betrayal with strict consequences, yet still hires competent rivals rather than destroying every opponent. The result was efficient and, from his point of view, fair. Practical examples help make this less distant. Think of a small town where a factory closes and families disperse. One former worker organizes others, negotiates with new investors, and enforces rules so everyone shares new jobs fairly. That organizer can be resented, feared, or praised, sometimes all three. He behaved similarly, though with horses and arrows instead of boardrooms. He also established rules to curb excessive private revenge because unchecked cycles of violence weaken communities. In a way, he replaced continuous petty feuding with a system that made loyalty worth something. People responded when they could expect predictable outcomes rather than random vengeance. There is a gentle irony in how survival, loss, and revenge fed each other. Survival hardened him. Loss refined his aims. Vengeance gave him followers who trusted that he would repay both kindness and injury in clear ways. Yet revenge was costly. Every act of reprisal required resources and left scars on the land and on people's memories. Even leaders who start with personal motives find that a campaign of reprisal becomes an institutional habit, difficult to stop. That lesson is timeless. Justice turned into endless retaliation corrodes the very order it seeks to protect. For those listening in the quiet, there is a practical takeaway tucked into the narrative. When life strips away comfort, the most reliable things are skills and steady allies. When you are wronged, careful responses, measured, strategic, and aimed at restoring balance, tend to build lasting strength more than blind fury. And a little humor softens the truth. He learned to sleep in a felt tent, whereas we complain about bad Wi-Fi. Both kinds of discomfort teach patience. If you let the rhythm of survival, the ache of loss, and the cooling of revenge settle, you begin to see how someone forged from hardship might reshape an entire world, step by careful step. Forging alliances and rivalries. Genghis Khan built power not just by winning battles but by turning relationships into tools. Marriage ties, sworn brotherhoods, and the careful absorption of defeated groups all served the same purpose, to create loyalties that worked for him. He formed formal bonds with leaders like Togrul of the Karates and began life as a blood brother with Jamukha. Those early ties could become sources of support or sharp rivalries later on. When a marriage was arranged, it was more than family life. Borte's role, for example, helped secure alliances and provide a political anchor. Think of these moves like modern networking, where a shared project or a family connection opens doors. Sometimes it worked wonderfully, sometimes it blew up in his face. People are people, after all. He also reorganized society and the army to break old loyalties and build new ones. Instead of leaving fighting units tied to clans, he mixed men from different tribes into the same companies, units based on tens, hundreds, and thousands, so a soldier's first loyalty was to his commander and comrades, not to a distant family leader. In practical terms, this is like a manager intentionally making cross-department teams to stop office cliques and make everyone pull in the same direction. When nobles or skilled enemies were brought in, they were often given positions and responsibilities rather than simply punished, that gave them a stake in the new order. It made desertion less attractive and cooperation more profitable. Rivalries were handled with a blend of blunt force and savvy incentives. Jamukha's shift from ally to rival shows how personal bonds could sour, and Genghis did not hesitate to use both diplomacy and decisive force when necessary. He would reward those who switched sides with rank and land, but those who resisted could expect severe consequences. A conquered leader who accepted a position was often preserved, one who kept plotting tended to disappear. That dual approach, carrot and stick, keeps things simple, offer a real benefit for cooperation, and make the cost of opposition obvious. It's like persuading a stubborn coworker to join a project by offering them a meaningful role, while also making it clear that blocking progress won't end well. Lessons from his method still resonate: build alliances through shared interests, mix teams to break unhealthy loyalties, and be ready to incorporate useful rivals rather than crushing every opponent. Small practical steps, clear roles, fair rewards, and a structure that doesn't let old grudges dominate, make large, diverse groups work together. And yes, a touch of humor helps. When forging a new team, a joke at the start of a meeting can do wonders. Genghis's mix of personal ties, institutional redesign, and pragmatic mercy created a durable base for expansion, showing that power is as much about the people you bind to you as the battles you win. The first battles and breakthroughs. Early fights on the steppe were less about glorious charges and more about testing tactics, leaders, and loyalty. Small raids and clashes with neighboring tribes revealed what worked: mobility, surprise, and a deadly mix of bow and horse. The bow itself was a simple advantage: short, powerful, and usable while riding, like preferring a compact, fast car on a winding mountain road instead of a lumbering truck. Scouts and light cavalry could strike, pull back, and strike again before the slower enemy even caught a clear picture of what was happening. Command and organization grew out of necessity, not theory. Fighters were reorganized into clear units, groups of tens and hundreds, with promotions based on ability rather than birth. Think of it as a sports team where the best player gets to captain the squad, instead of the captain being chosen because he's related to the owner. That merit-based approach meant capable leaders on the ground could execute complicated maneuvers without waiting for distant orders. Discipline followed, looting was controlled, and orders were obeyed quickly, which kept the force functional even when campaigns stretched far from home. Information was as lethal as arrows. Riders carried news and orders across vast distances using relay stations and trusted couriers, while scouts and spies supplied the army with local knowledge. Deception became an art form, pretending to flee and then turning on a pursuing enemy often led to routs. Picture a chess player sacrificing a pawn to lure an opponent into a trap. The idea is old but effective. Psychological tactics also mattered. A well-timed night attack or terrifying display of cavalry could make a larger force collapse without a long, bloody fight. When fortified towns were encountered, adaptation replaced brute force. Siege engineers from conquered regions were brought in, and new methods like battering rams, scaling ladders, and trebuchets were used to breach walls. This was practical learning on the fly. If you don't have a hammer, borrow one from someone who does. Supply lines and logistics were tightened so armies could stay on campaign longer, and artisans and specialists from across the steppe and cities were integrated to keep machines working. It showed a willingness to learn and borrow rather than stubbornly cling to one way of fighting. The combined effect of these early battles and breakthroughs was a shift from raiding bands to a mobile, organized war machine capable of sustained campaigns. Rapid communication, flexible organization, clever tactics, and the willingness to use outside skills turned battlefield victories into strategic advantages. In plain terms, it was like turning a group of talented neighbors who play music into a touring orchestra. Suddenly, they could perform on a much larger stage, and their reach kept growing. Cavalry warfare and steppe mobility. Riders on the steppe relied on speed as their primary weapon, and everything they did supported that simple truth. They rode small, tough horses that could nibble sparse grass and keep moving long after larger mounts would tire. These animals were like the off-road vehicles of their day, compact, durable, and surprisingly efficient. Each warrior usually kept several horses with him, switching mounts through the day so neither horse sank into exhaustion, which meant a fast army could keep running while others had to slow down and rest. Organization made their mobility systematic rather than chaotic. Units were grouped in tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s, a structure that made orders flow quickly and made it easy to regroup or split off for scouting. Communication was fast too. Riders used flags, horns, and messengers on fresh mounts to send news across the plains. Think of it as an old-fashioned highway with relay stations. These stations stored spare horses and food so a courier could swap mounts and press on, much like a modern postal service switching trucks at depots to keep deliveries fast. Tactics built on that mobility, hit-and-run attacks, sudden encirclements, and staged retreats that lured enemies into traps. Shooting accurately from a moving horse was a basic skill. Riders practiced from childhood until the motion felt natural, so a bow could be loose in the brief window between passing enemy ranks. Stirrups helped here by giving riders steady footing, and composite bows, short but powerful, were perfect for firing in the cramped space of a saddle. A troop that could fire while retreating and then wheel around to strike again had a huge advantage over foot soldiers who needed time to form up. Logistics were deceptively simple and effective. Instead of hauling wagons and giant supply trains, these cavalry forces traveled light and used the landscape to feed their animals. Men carried compact packs and relied on milk, dried meat, and what the land could offer. This meant campaigns could start quickly and change direction on a whim, frustrating opponents who planned for long sieges or set-piece battles. It's like comparing a bicycle courier weaving through traffic to a convoy of trucks trying to turn. The courier gets where he needs to go much faster, and sometimes with a grin. Horse culture and logistics. Mongol horses were not the elegant thoroughbreds more familiar to European portraits, but small, tough steppe ponies bred to survive on thin grass and bitter winters. They could graze on what looked like nothing at all to an outsider, and that kept whole armies moving without the need for elaborate supply convoys. Riders learned to read a horse's condition like a mechanic reads an engine light. Limp tail, dull coat, or bright eyes told a story about feed, rest, and health. These animals doubled as workhorses, transport, and pantry, milk and, when desperate, meat, so caring for them was as practical as it was emotional. Each warrior normally kept several horses with him, often 3 or 4, switching mounts throughout a campaign to preserve endurance and speed. Fresh horses meant the same rider could ride harder and longer, and the army could leap across vast distances without wearing out a single animal. Communication ran on a relay network called the Yam or Ortu, a chain of stations where riders could swap tired horses for fresh ones and pick up food and shelter. Think of it as a medieval pit-stop system. You hand over your exhausted car, grab a new one, and keep going, except with a lot more fur and fewer cup holders. Logistics on the move were surprisingly simple and brilliantly efficient. Heavy loads rode on camels or carts, while most fighters traveled light, carrying only what fit on a horse's back. That made the force nimble. Saddles and stirrups were clever pieces of kit. The saddle is like a firm little chair strapped to the horse, and stirrups give a rider solid footing, so arrows can be loosed accurately while speeding along. The combination of compact, resilient horses and stable riding gear turned each rider into a mobile missile platform, fast, steady, and hard to pin down. In everyday terms, it's like trading a moving van for a pickup truck that can climb cliffs. Horses also shaped social life and training from an early age. Children were familiar with saddles and reins, games revolved around speed and skill, and races or mounted archery contests served as both sport and practice. The herds that followed an army were not just numbers on a ledger, they were living stores and replacements, rotated and grazed to keep the line moving. Hospitality systems and official tokens allowed messengers to requisition horses and lodging when needed, which kept bureaucracy from slowing down the ride. And, if you want a down-to-earth image, where a modern family might have a garage, a nomadic family's garage was a few dozen horses that knew the way home. Siegecraft and technological adoption. Commanders in the Mongol armies did not try to reinvent the wheel, they carried wheels, carpenters, and the people who knew how to use them. They picked up engineers, craftsmen, and specialists from the regions they passed through and put those skills straight to work. These experts were the ones who drew plans, measured walls, and figured out how to put a heavy machine exactly where it needed to be. Think of it like hiring a contractor when your house needs a tricky repair. You bring in the person who already knows the job, rather than learning it on the spot. Many of the tools they used were large versions of things you might recognize from everyday life. A trebuchet is basically a giant arm that swings a heavy weight to fling a stone. Picture someone on a playground seesaw, but with a boulder instead of a kid. Catapults did a similar job but in other designs, and ladders and siege towers let attackers reach the top of defensive walls the same way you might use a ladder to get on the roof. When walls were stubborn, miners dug tunnels underneath and removed supporting soil so a section would collapse. It's not unlike removing the legs from under a table to make it fall. They adapted each tool to the wall, the soil, and the weather, choosing the right gadget for the job instead of forcing one method on every problem. Adoption of new technology was practical and fast. When the Mongols encountered gunpowder weapons and explosive devices used by Chinese engineers, they put them into their kit. Simple devices that launched burning or explosive charges could break morale and cause fires inside a besieged place, and so they became part of the siege toolbox. They also learned the counterweight version of the big throwing machines from engineers in the West and combined those ideas with the traction machines they already knew. This mixing and matching is like borrowing a friend's recipe. Take the spice you like from one dish, the technique from another, and you end up with something that works better for you. Moving all of this across open country required its own kind of cleverness. Big engines were taken apart and packed on wagons or animals, then reassembled near the target. Carpentry skills had to be mobile, and materials scavenged locally whenever possible. Imagine trying to bring a couch through narrow city streets. You take it apart, carry the pieces, and put it back together where you need it. That same practical mindset kept sieges moving. Maintenance was continuous too. A broken axle or snapped rope couldn't wait, so blacksmiths and woodworkers were as essential as archers. Siegecraft blended force with patience and the occasional theatrical gesture. Attackers used machines to batter walls and hurl things over them, while also cutting off food, water, and hope. They attacked weak points and tried to trick defenders into revealing vulnerabilities. Sometimes the sight of a huge stone arcing through the sky or the crack of an explosive would do half the work by sapping defenders' courage. It's like walking into a tense meeting and dropping a dramatic piece of evidence on the table. the effect is not just practical, it's psychological. Above all, the Mongol approach to siege technology was adaptive and pragmatic. They did not cling to what they already knew. Instead, they borrowed, hired, and experimented until they had a flexible engineering core that could handle stone walls, wooden palisades, and everything in between. In the end, their real strength came from the habit of learning quickly and using whatever tools made the next city open its gates, sometimes literally, with as little fuss as possible. And like a good DIY project, success often came down to having the right person with the right tool at the right moment, plus a little stubbornness and a willingness to try something new. Intelligence, messaging, and strategy. A system of mounted couriers and relay stations called the Yam kept news moving across the steppe, and it was the backbone of all decisions. Riders carried official tablets, peza, that opened doors and guaranteed supplies at way stations, so a messenger could change horses and keep going without wasting time. Think of it as an old-fashioned overnight delivery network but on horseback and with much firmer deadlines. The speed of that network let leaders coordinate forces that were far apart, and it turned distance from an obstacle into an advantage. Scouts and spies filled in the picture with details that machines cannot capture: the lay of the land, the mood of a town, whether an army looked tired or well supplied. Traders and local guides were tapped for information, because people who travel for trade often notice things armies do not. In simple terms, it was like checking reviews and neighborhood gossip before choosing where to set up camp. Reliable tips made the difference between walking into a trap and finding a safe route. Short signals, smoke, flags, riders appearing at dawn, sent urgent warnings, while long reports described supply needs and enemy dispositions. Messages weren't only about facts, they shaped enemies' choices. Clear, fast orders allowed armies to feint, fall back, and then suddenly concentrate where the opponent least expected. Psychological pressure mattered too. Offers of generous terms for surrender were sent alongside demonstrations of overwhelming force for those who resisted. This mix of carrot and stick reduced needless fighting, saved supplies, and often made sieges unnecessary. The combination of speed, accurate scouting, and carefully worded demands is a lesson in persuasion as much as in warfare. Practical takeaways are easy to picture and use today. Keep communication lines simple and reliable, verify what you hear from more than one source, and plan for quick shifts when new information arrives. A single clear message can prevent confusion, much like a concise text telling everyone where to meet prevents a missed movie. And a little humor helps. Imagine a modern group chat run on horses, fewer gifts, but much faster delivery. Military organization and discipline. Mongol armies used a simple and powerful counting system to organize people, groups of 10, 100, 1, 0, and 10, 0, each with its own leader and responsibilities. These small, repeatable units made it easy to move, feed, and command large forces, because each leader only had to manage a set number of subordinates. Think of it like a restaurant kitchen where one chef supervises a few cooks, those cooks supervise line cooks, and so on. Everyone knows who to ask when the order slips. The labels for those groups, Arban, 10, Zun, 100, Mingan, 1, 0, Tuman, 10, 0, gave structure without slowing down decision-making. Leaders were chosen for skill and loyalty more than for birthright, which kept competence high. Commanders who proved themselves in battle rose quickly, and those who failed or fled faced harsh consequences. Discipline was straightforward and enforced. Desertion and disobedience were punished severely to prevent panic and collapse on the battlefield. It's a bit like sports. If one player starts running the wrong way, the whole team loses the game, except the rules of that ancient game were much stricter. Communication and initiative were built into the system so that small units could act fast when needed. Riders carried messages, flags and horns signaled maneuvers, and every soldier knew standard responses to common battlefield situations. Training focused on basic skills that could be repeated under pressure, such as shooting while moving and changing formations quickly. Imagine a well-drilled fire drill where everyone already knows the exit route and what to do. A Mongol unit practiced until those actions were almost automatic. Camp life followed military rules as well, and that order extended beyond the battlefield. Spoils were allocated according to rules so that troops remained motivated and theft or chaos within the camp was minimized. Scouts and intelligence networks kept commanders informed, and conquered peoples were often incorporated in ways that leveraged local skills. In daily terms, this meant fewer surprises and more predictable living, which kept morale up. A little humor helps. Discipline meant you couldn't just take the best horse home and call it borrowing. You would be reminded, in no uncertain terms, that rules have teeth. The Yasa, law and order. Genghis Khan's legal code, often called the Yasa in historical accounts, functioned as a practical rulebook for a society built on mobility, military might, and frequent encounters with different peoples. It was not a single printed document handed to every family. Instead, it combined long-standing customs with new rules issued from the top, and many of its specifics were kept secret or passed on orally. The aim was simple: keep order across an enormous, shifting community where people spoke different languages and followed different traditions. The content covered a surprising variety of everyday matters. Military discipline was central. Units needed to move, fight, and obey without hesitation, so strict rules governed conduct on campaign and the division of spoils. At the same time, there were clear protections for trade and movement. Merchants and messengers were given special status so long-distance commerce could flow safely, similar to modern protections for diplomats and couriers. Religious tolerance was also encouraged, meaning clerics of many faiths could continue their practices without fear, which helped reduce needless uprisings in newly governed regions. Think of it as a mix of battlefield regulations, a travel safety policy for merchants, and a city ordinance that quietly says, "Don't harass the neighbors." Enforcement relied on clear authority and swift consequences. Commanders, local leaders, and envoys were all expected to apply the rules evenly, and violations were met with punishments meant to deter chaos. For ordinary people, this created a predictable environment. If theft and violent lawlessness were punished quickly, merchants could travel farther without hiring extra guards, and villagers could farm in peace. A modern parallel might be traffic laws that keep roads usable for delivery trucks. Boring, maybe, but essential if you want bread on the table. The Yasa's focus on loyalty and responsibility also meant that promotions and privileges tended to go to those who proved dependable, which resembles today's merit-based systems more than hereditary privilege. Practical lessons from those rules still resonate. Clear, enforced standards reduce friction in diverse organizations, whether an army, a marketplace, or a multinational company. Protecting channels of communication and trade builds prosperity, and tolerating different beliefs lowers the chance of needless conflict. A little humor helps. Picture an ancient HR manual stamped with horse prints, telling you not to take another person's saddle, to arrive on time for the cavalry muster, and to respect the chaplain. The Yasa wasn't perfect or pretty in every detail, but as a tool for ordering a fast-moving empire it offered coherent, enforceable rules that turned chaos into cooperation. Meritocracy and social mobility. Genghis Khan reshaped who could lead and who could rise by putting ability and loyalty above noble birth. He broke up old clan power and built teams where a skilled horse archer, a clever organizer, or a trusted aide could move up the ranks. People who showed they could get things done were picked for command or administrative jobs, even if their families had no special status before. This made the system flexible and useful. Talent mattered more than pedigree. Practical skills counted a great deal, especially in battle and logistics. Skilled scouts, engineers who knew how to build siege machines, and commanders who could coordinate troops were handed responsibility because those abilities mattered on the move. A soldier who proved steady under pressure could become an officer. A craftsman who made excellent bows or maintained horses could become indispensable. In everyday life, it's like a restaurant where a dishwasher who learns to cook and keeps a cool head on a busy night can eventually run the kitchen. Loyalty was another currency. Trust matters when whole communities move across the steppe and when supply lines must be protected. People who demonstrated loyalty and reliability won positions overseeing units, collecting resources, or administering newly controlled towns. This helped create social mobility. service and competence opened doors that family name alone could not. Think of it as a workplace where managers promote people who reliably deliver results, not just those who came from the right neighborhood. The system also borrowed expertise from conquered communities instead of excluding them. Administrators, engineers, and traders from different backgrounds were often put to work where their skills were useful, which increased both efficiency and chances for advancement. In modern terms, it's like a company hiring specialists from different industries and giving them meaningful roles so the whole enterprise runs better. That practical blending of skills encouraged people to develop useful talents. There are clear lessons that apply today: reduce barriers to entry, reward demonstrable competence, and create paths for people to gain responsibility through training and proven performance. Small changes, mentorship programs, fair hiring practices, and openings for lateral talent movement make a big difference. And yes, it's a bit like preferring a reliable teammate over someone with a fancy family tree. Sometimes the most valuable player is the quiet one who shows up and gets the job done. Diplomacy, tribute, and fear. Genghis Khan combined blunt, business-like bargaining with calculated terror to bend rival rulers to his will, and he made sure everyone understood the rules before a city ever saw a sword. He sent messengers who carried offers: submit and pay a regular tribute, keep your local leaders, and provide troops when needed, refuse and face severe destruction. Those envoys were treated as sacred messengers in Mongol practice, much like how modern diplomats enjoy immunity. Harming them was tantamount to declaring war, and the Mongols enforced that rule ruthlessly. When messengers were killed, the Mongol response was not merely anger, it was a legal and strategic justification for wide-ranging military action. Tribute functioned like a structured payment plan. It could be goods, horses, silk, metalwork, or livestock, or people with useful skills, such as metalworkers and artisans. Think of it as a tax, except the collector was a fast cavalry and the penalties for non-payment could be immediate and brutal. Local rulers were often left in place as vassals so long as they supplied what was asked and did not incite rebellion. This saved time and manpower. It also kept daily life functioning for most people, because administrators who already knew how to collect taxes and run irrigation could keep doing their jobs under new overlords. Diplomacy was practical and sometimes surprisingly generous. Skilled craftsmen and merchants were valuable and usually spared. Their expertise was treated like a rare ingredient in a stew. You want to keep it. Mongol envoys used a system of stamped authority, metal tablets that proved they were official, which let them travel fast and requisition supplies along the way. The postal system they relied on worked like an early express delivery service, with relay stations that kept communications moving across vast distances. Offering lenient terms and guarantees to those who surrendered was not just mercy, it was good strategy. It reduced resistance and preserved productive communities. Fear, however, was the other side of the coin, and it was wielded with intention. When a city resisted stubbornly, the Mongols could and did destroy whole populations, a tactic that terrified neighbors into quick surrender. That reputation spread faster than any envoy, and it often produced the same result at a distance. Rulers sent gifts and hostages rather than risk annihilation. This was psychological warfare in its most basic form, visible consequences to signal that resistance was expensive. It was effective, and a little brutal humor would call it the ancient version of a "do not disturb" sign backed by overwhelming force. There was a method in the menace. When tribute flowed and local structures remained intact, trade reopened, markets thrived, and skilled people were kept alive to contribute to the conqueror's power. When resistance persisted and was crushed, the story of the crushing traveled to the next city over, which often chose a shorter route: negotiate. So the system produced both the carrot and the stick. You could think of it as a hard-nosed landlord who alternates between offering a lease and evicting tenants, but on a continental scale, and with fewer polite notices. Every decision mixed calculation with theater. Letters carried explicit terms and sometimes flattering promises to rulers who cooperated, while the sound of drums and the sight of prepared siege engines reinforced the options. Practical examples from daily life make the point. agreeing to pay tribute was like joining a subscription service that keeps a community safe and connected. Killing an envoy was like destroying the post office. Everyone loses, and retaliation follows. The result was a clear cue to many states. Calculated submission often preserved homes and livelihoods, while obstinacy risked everything. A grim bargain, perhaps, but one that explains why large areas preferred the security of tribute and diplomacy once the Mongol name became known. Unification of the Mongol tribes. Temujin emerged from a tangle of rival bands and clan feuds and built something new by blending personal ties with practical rules. He did not rely on sheer force alone. Instead, he turned marriage ties, sworn friendships, and captured enemies into tools for loyalty, creating a dependable core of followers who trusted him more than they trusted old clan leaders. He rewrote who could hold power by promoting people for skill and loyalty rather than for noble birth. That change sounds modern because it is. Think of a company that fires the family nepotism rule and starts giving promotions to the best coder instead of the boss's cousin. In practice, this meant soldiers and commanders rose because they proved themselves in battle or in administration, and not because their grandfathers had a better horse. The Mongol military and social structure was reorganized into clear, repeatable units so everyone knew their place and duty. Small groups of 10, then hundreds, then thousands formed the backbone of the army, which made command simple and efficient. That approach is like breaking a big, messy project into tidy teams, fewer misunderstandings, faster orders, and easier problem-solving. He also used rules and public punishments to create predictability. People could live by the same set of expectations no matter which clan they belonged to. Taking a portion of loot and sharing it publicly bound soldiers to the leader who had given them that reward. It worked much like a leader who distributes bonuses and praise openly. Loyalty grows when people see fairness with their own eyes. Finally, unification was practical, not merely ideological. Craftsmen, scribes, and foreign specialists were welcomed and given roles, while religious tolerance eased friction between groups with different beliefs. The result was a patchwork society held together by clear rules, merit-based promotion, shared rewards, and the constant reality that cooperation beat endless feuding. Even on a cold steppe, a warm tent with good rules beats a cold camp of squabbling cousins, and it made a unified power out of many small, wary tribes. From conquest to administration. After the vast military victories, attention shifted to making a sprawling, diverse empire actually work. Genghis Khan turned battlefield discipline into practical tools for daily rule. The army's neat system of tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s became a way to organize society as well as fight. Think of it like turning a chaotic startup into a company with clear teams and managers. Someone had to know who was responsible for what, and that clarity kept things moving. Promotions were often given for skill and loyalty rather than family name, so capable writers and administrators could rise by merit. That meant competent people ran things, and unused nobles learned that being good at a job mattered more than being born into one. Rules and records mattered too, because an empire is a tangle of people, goods, and ideas that need herding. A set of laws, commonly referred to as a code, provided simple, practical instructions, both stern and oddly modern: protect messengers, respect private property, and punish theft and betrayal. To keep trade flowing, a relay network of stations and riders carried messages and goods across long distances, like a very efficient ancient postal service. Officials carried special badges that served as travel permits and proof of authority. Think of them as early ID cards that opened doors and ensured safe passage. Those devices cut down on petty hurdles and made it easier for merchants and messengers to do business. Administration also meant using people's skills, not throwing them away. Skilled artisans, administrators, and engineers from conquered regions were recruited and given roles where they could contribute. Mapmakers, tax collectors, even doctors found new employers. This practical approach helped integrate different cultures. Engineers who had built irrigation systems or castles were valued instead of killed or ignored. The state kept track of populations and resources with censuses and registers, which helped when collecting tribute or planning where grain and supplies were needed. It's like counting stock in a warehouse. Without an inventory, you quickly run out of the things people depend on. Security and commerce were linked in a simple, effective way. Safe roads meant more merchants and more taxes, which in turn allowed the rulers to maintain order and pay officials. Religious freedom was encouraged, which reduced uprisings driven by faith and made it easier for diverse communities to coexist. The approach was pragmatic: allow people to worship freely, but expect them to follow the law and contribute to public life. A bit of humor sometimes helped smooth relations. Leaders enjoyed clever, practical solutions and a rough joke now and then, but the backbone was order and predictable rules. In the end, turning conquests into a functioning empire meant building systems that worked long after a battle was won. Trade networks and the Silk Road. When the Mongol rulers brought huge stretches of land under one authority, merchants suddenly had clearer paths to move across continents. Caravans that once feared bandits found fewer dangers on the road because the rulers prioritized the safety of traders. Think of it like turning a bumpy, crime-prone country lane into a monitored highway where travelers could rest without worry. One of the practical tools that made this happen was a system of relay stations, called yam, where couriers and merchants could change horses, sleep, and get supplies. Another was a small token of authority, the pesa, which acted like a travel pass and granted its holder certain protections and privileges. In everyday life, that pesa was a bit like a backstage pass at a concert, only instead of front-row seats, it got you fueled camels and an escort if needed. The rulers also enforced strict punishment for highway robbery, which sounds harsh, but it discouraged thieves and kept trade routes moving. As a result, the volume and variety of goods flowing along the Silk Road increased: silk and textiles, spices and salt, metals and luxury items, but also less tangible things like ideas, medical knowledge, and technical skills. Craftsmen and scholars traveled more easily, setting up workshops in new cities or teaching their crafts across borders. A local potter might suddenly find a steady market for his wares hundreds of miles away, much like a small artisan today shipping handmade goods through an online marketplace to customers around the world. The broader effect is one modern businesses and logisticians still recognize: secure, reliable routes lower costs and encourage exchange. Postal hubs, container ports, and international passports all echo the same basic idea: make movement easier, and trade will follow. So next time a package arrives at your door, remember it rides on centuries of rules, stops, and clever paperwork that once helped a caravan go from steppe to city without losing its lunch or its goods. Cultural exchanges and knowledge flow. Trade routes under Mongol rule stitched cities and people together, and that connection let ideas travel almost as freely as silk and spices. Merchants and envoys moved along safer roads, which meant books, maps, and technical know-how could cross mountains and deserts without being lost or stolen. The postal relay system that sprang up worked like a string of message relays. Riders and fresh horses at stations kept information moving fast, much like a courier service today. It was practical. If you needed a clockmaker from one city to repair a machine in another, the system made that possible. Leaders on the steppe often welcomed skilled people from faraway places and sometimes relocated artisans to where their skills were needed, encouraging a mix of talents. Craftspeople who made textiles, metalwork or paper found new markets and new techniques to learn. One simple example: a potter learning a glazing trick from a traveling artisan could change the appearance of an entire village's ceramics, similar to how a recipe swap can transform a local kitchen. That everyday exchange multiplied across whole regions, altering how things were made and sold. Science and medicine flowed along those same routes too, as doctors, astrologers and healers traded notes like neighbors swapping remedies for a stubborn cough. Medical texts and herbal knowledge moved from one language into another, so a remedy common in one place might turn up on the other side of the continent. Maps were shared and updated, improving navigation for merchants. In practical terms, this meant merchants could plan safer, more efficient journeys, like using a good GPS instead of guessing which road to take. Religious and philosophical ideas also met and mingled, and people in towns and caravanserais heard teachings from different traditions. Officials tended to be pragmatic about faiths, allowing temples, mosques and monasteries to operate, which made scholarly discussion possible across belief lines. That openness made it easier for a mathematician trained in one tradition to pick up methods from another, gradually blending problem-solving techniques. Think of it as a potluck dinner for ideas. Everyone brings something, and the whole table gets richer. Technology transfer was visible in everyday tools and Warcraft too, though that word needn't sound grim. Engineers carrying ideas about building, irrigation or simple machines had a real impact on agriculture and cities. Papermaking and printing techniques, for instance, circulated along these routes and eased the reproduction of texts. The result was more copies of practical manuals and books, so a farmer or an apprentice could learn from a text written far away, rather than relying purely on local memory. Communication networks, mobility of specialists, and tolerance for different ways of thinking combined to make cultural exchange ordinary and continuous. People borrowed food spices, clothing styles, legal ideas and technical tricks, often without grand announcements. It was like a slow, steady mixing pot. Small changes accumulated and, over time, shaped the look and feel of towns and courts across vast distances, and sometimes produced surprisingly useful outcomes, such as new crops, improved tools, or a better map to follow home. Cities, governors, and revenue systems. Conquered towns were turned into practical hubs rather than trophies, and that changed how people lived and worked in them. Cities with skilled craftsmen, markets, and river or caravan access were especially useful. Instead of raising a busy trading town, Mongol rulers often kept its walls and markets intact so taxes and trade could keep flowing. Think of it as preserving a busy shopping mall because it pays the bills, not because anyone liked the decor. Places known for craftsmanship or trade became nodes in a larger network that moved goods, information, and money across vast distances. A simple but crucial step was appointing officials to run those hubs. Daragachi, the name given to imperial overseers, acted like a combination of governor, customs officer, and troubleshooter. Sometimes the appointee was a Mongol loyalist, sometimes a local official who knew the language and customs. The goal was practical: keep order, ensure markets functioned, and collect what the state required. In everyday terms, it's like a city mayor who reports to a bigger government and has to balance keeping businesses happy with turning over part of the revenue to fund roads and security. If the overseer did their job well, caravans passed smoothly and merchants paid their dues. If not, trade slowed and the city suffered. Money and goods were collected in a few clear ways: direct taxes or levies on households, tribute from subject towns, customs duties on trade passing through, and requisitions when the state needed supplies or labor. To know how much to ask for, administrators conducted counts and assessments of households and resources, so extraction was based on information rather than guesswork. A helpful modern parallel is a property tax. After a city does an inventory of homes and businesses, the better the records, the fairer and more predictable the collections. The state also relocated skilled artisans and technicians when needed, using specialists to build weapons, craft luxury goods, or improve infrastructure. It was blunt sometimes, but effective. Imagine a government calling in its best contractors to work on a major project. Protection of trade corridors was another practical revenue decision. By securing routes and offering safe passage, administrators increased the flow of goods and the customs revenue that came with them. Relay stations for messengers and state couriers were set up to speed communication, paid for out of the same coffers. The balance between extracting wealth and keeping a city prosperous mattered a lot. If a governor squeezed too hard, merchants might move away. If they were too lax, the army and administration would starve. The task required a mix of firmness, local knowledge, and occasionally a sense of humor, which helped when negotiating with a disgruntled merchant whose caravan had been delayed. Religion, tolerance, and policy. When Genghis Khan moved from being a steppe leader to the ruler of a vast, many-peopled realm, he treated religion as a practical tool for keeping order and easing everyday life. He did not try to force everyone into the same belief. Instead, he protected a wide range of faiths and made rules that let different religious communities live and work without constant interference. This was sensible rather than sentimental. Different priests and imams, monks and shamans were often exempted from tax and conscription, which meant they could keep teaching, performing rituals, and helping people feel grounded without being pulled away for state labor. He also expected people to be judged by their actions more than by their faith. Religious leaders were allowed to run their own affairs, they could inherit property and organize charity, and they handled marriages and burials within their communities. In practice, this meant that a trader could cross an empire without losing access to his own rituals, and a family could bury the dead according to their beliefs rather than according to a single imposed rule. A simple example: a caravan coming into a new town would usually find a place to pray, a slaughterhouse following familiar rules, and a local official who understood the customs. Life carried on with fewer sparks of conflict. Pragmatism guided many of his policies. Skilled people were useful, no matter what they believed, so he recruited artists, engineers, accountants, and diplomats from many faiths. This approach turned the empire into a kind of multicultural workplace. Think of it like a modern company that hires for talent rather than background. The business runs smoother and grows faster. He used people's knowledge, calendars, languages, building skills, and this meant religious diversity translated into administrative strength. Tolerance was not just generosity. It was law. A set of rules helped enforce protection for religious practice and safe passage for pilgrims and traders. Those rules discouraged robbery and bigotry, because stability encouraged commerce and communication. When roads are safe, markets thrive. When markets thrive, cities grow. This practical feedback loop shows how religious freedom can serve public life, not just private conscience. There were exceptions and rough edges, because ruling an empire is messy and people on the ground sometimes acted differently than the ruler intended. But the overall stance favored coexistence. In day-to-day terms, this meant neighbors often heard different bells, chants, or prayers but still shared water, food, and laws. Picture a village where one family lights incense at dawn while the next family heads off to prayer. Everyone nods, shares a meal at festivals, and gets on with work. A little quirky, perhaps, but efficient. That blend of legal protection, pragmatic appointment of talent, and social freedom shaped how diverse communities interacted. It reduced the number of reasons people had to fight each other, and it made the machinery of government work across cultural lines. For modern readers, the lesson is simple and useful: respect for belief, paired with clear rules and merit-based roles, tends to calm tensions and get things done. It's like agreeing to the house rules before a potluck so no one brings a stray casserole that upends the menu: polite, practical, and helpful. Science and technology under the Khanate. Across the territories under Mongol rule, a chain of relay stations and official passes created a fast communication system that was unusual for its time. Messengers could change horses at regular intervals at these stations, which meant information and goods moved much faster than over other long-distance routes. The metal peza, an official badge carried by envoys, worked like a VIP entry card. It granted access to food, horses, and help along the way, cutting red tape and saving days of travel. In practical terms, this is comparable to modern express mail combined with a trusted ID card, and yes, a tired rider appreciated it as much as a commuter enjoys a fast train. Chinese engineers were often recruited for military and civil projects, bringing with them powerful ideas and tools. Siege machines like counterweight trebuchets were adapted and used more widely. These are big throwing machines that hurl heavy stones to break walls, rather like a very large slingshot. Gunpowder also found new routes westward through these connections. Explain gunpowder simply: it's a mix that burns very fast and can blow things apart or make loud noises, handy for fireworks and, more seriously, for early explosive weapons. Think of gunpowder like a very noisy chemistry experiment that people eventually used for defense and offense. Paper and printing from the eastern lands became practical tools for administration and religion across the whole region. Officials found that stamping many copies of orders or tax records on paper was much quicker than carving messages into wood or copying by hand, so printing blocks and paper production made government work smoother. This is a lot like how a modern office uses photocopiers instead of handwriting every form. One stamp saves many hours. Scholars, clerics, and merchants benefited too, since books and records could circulate more cheaply and more widely than before. Medicine and scientific knowledge traveled with the people who moved along the roads. Physicians from different backgrounds exchanged ideas, herbal cures and surgical tricks mixed with local treatments, producing practical know-how that could be used on campaign or in the city. Astronomy and map-making were also practical interests, because good maps and a working sense of the stars helped planning and navigation. These exchanges were not abstract. A caravan leader who could read a reliable map or consult a skilled healer was simply more likely to reach the next market in one piece. Animal health got special attention, because horses were the backbone of everything: communication, transport, and war. Farriers and veterinarians tended hooves, treated wounds, and advised on diet. Their methods were practical and often surprisingly clever. A well-cared-for horse was worth as much as a small team of workers, which is why a veterinarian functioned like a combination of mechanic, doctor, and coach for the living engines of the steppe. Simple practices, rest rotations, salted feeds, and prompt wound cleaning, made a big difference, and that's a lesson still true for pets and livestock today. Overall, the Khanate's networks and openness to skilled outsiders worked like a human-sized internet of the era. Information, techniques, and crafts moved along highways of riders and ships, picked up by local hands, and turned into useful results. Sometimes the transfers were accidental, a potter learning a new kiln design from a passing artisan, and sometimes they were deliberate, as when rulers invited experts to build or advise. The result felt practical, patchwork, and resourceful, and often, surprisingly modern in its straightforward focus on solving everyday problems. Human cost and demographic impact. Across vast stretches of the steppe and into the towns beyond, military campaigns reshaped lives in ways that can still be felt. Cities that once hummed with traders and artisans were sometimes emptied or reduced to ruins, sending refugees on dusty roads with whatever they could carry. Whole villages could be abandoned after a single attack, leaving fields untended and communities broken. Think of a neighborhood losing its baker, its schoolteacher, and half the farmers in one swift sweep. Many people were forced to move, taken as labor or resettled by conquerors who wanted skills and craftsmen close at hand. Skilled workers, potters, metalworkers, carpenters, were often sent to new centers to build palaces, weapons, or infrastructure, which sounds like an odd form of recruitment, and it was. Picture a potter suddenly shipped hundreds of miles to fashion tiles for an unfamiliar court, not the family reunion anyone had planned. Children and adults alike could end up far from home, learning new languages and trades, sometimes blending into new societies over time. The demographic ripples were complex. Some regions experienced sharp drops in population where warfare and famine struck hardest. Nearby areas sometimes absorbed displaced people, changing the ethnic and cultural mix of towns and countryside. Over generations this led to new blends of language, cuisine, and customs. Genetic research has picked up on this too. Certain widespread family lines in parts of Asia appear to spread rapidly in this era, and many researchers link that pattern to the movements and social changes that followed conquest. That kind of legacy is less about immediate suffering and more about how families and communities reknit themselves afterward. Loss of leadership and local knowledge was another cost. Libraries, archives, and religious centers could be looted or destroyed, taking with them records and traditions that had taken generations to build. When scholars, clerics, or masters of craft were killed or displaced, the next generation sometimes had to relearn what had been lost. On the other hand, the mixing of peoples also meant that new ideas and techniques traveled more freely than before. Seeds of knowledge moved along with people, even if the journey was forced. It's a bittersweet picture, great human pain and disruption, and yet a shifting map of culture and memory that endured long after the battles were over. Myths, memory, and historical revision. Various written sources, from the secret history of the Mongols to Persian and Chinese chronicles, offer competing portraits of the man who unified the steppe. Some describe him as a ruthless conqueror who smashed cities and reshaped borders, others emphasize his skills as an organizer, lawmaker, and patron of trade. Oral tradition on the steppe preserves praise songs and family genealogies that celebrate lineage and courage, and those stories often glow brighter with each telling. Travelers' tales from beyond the steppes added color too, sometimes turning local gossip into global legend. Historians try to sort these layers like an old teapot full of tea leaves, careful, bit by bit. They compare accounts, check archaeological clues, and ask who wrote each story and why. A Persian chronicler writing for a court might highlight devastation to explain political shifts, while Mongol praise poetry aimed to glorify ancestors and stabilize rule. It helps to think of it like recipes passed down in a family. Everyone remembers the basic dish, but spices change and someone always insists they make it best. Bias is normal. Recognizing it is the first step toward clearer truth. Memory in museums, textbooks, and festivals shapes how people see the past today. In Mongolia, for example, public celebrations and monuments present him as a founder and national symbol, a source of pride. Elsewhere, the same figure can appear on school pages as either a civilization breaker or a state builder, depending on what the storyteller needs that year. This matters for daily life, tourism, national identity, and even which historical figures get taught to children in classrooms hinge on those choices. A statue or a film can shift what millions think overnight, much like a catchy song at a family reunion changes everyone's memory of the event. Historical revision is not about erasing the past, but about refining understanding as new evidence and perspectives arrive. Scholars revisit old accounts, test them against new digs or documents, and bring in voices previously ignored: women in the courts, traders on the Silk Road, and local communities whose echoes survive in place names or folk tales. Revision can be uncomfortable, because it forces societies to reframe proud stories or painful ones. Yet it also makes the picture fuller and often more human. Everyday examples show how myths grow and how memory works. Remember the office rumor that started with one email and became an epic tale by Monday? The past behaves the same way: small facts get amplified, and repetition gives them weight. A little humor helps. History here is a lot like family gossip, just with better hats and more horses. In the end, separating myth from memory and making careful revisions gives people a chance to understand a complex figure without losing the stories that matter to them. Echoes in modern geopolitics. Mongol legacy still shapes the language of power across Eurasia. Leaders and politicians reach into the past to borrow symbols of unity, mobility, and decisive leadership. In Mongolia this is obvious. The founder is invoked as a national ancestor and visible in public life through monuments and tourism campaigns that invite visitors to follow in the footsteps of a vast steppe heritage. The huge equestrian statue outside the capital is a practical example. It brings tourists, fuels local pride, and quietly reminds neighboring countries that cultural memory is a living thing. For citizens, that can mean a steady stream of souvenirs and a renewed interest in horseback skills at summer festivals. For diplomats, it means negotiating with a partner who sees empire not just as history but as identity. Trade and infrastructure planners talk about connectivity using echoes of the old overland networks. The medieval Mongol sphere helped link cities and merchants across long distances, and modern states often compare their highway and rail projects to those historic corridors. This is not a claim that modern trains are the same as caravans. Rather, it is a rhetorical and practical parallel. Both aim to lower travel friction, cut transit times, and draw economic activity to regions that once sat off the beaten path. A logistics manager today might nod and joke that the relay station concept lives on every time a truck hands cargo to the next driver at a distribution center. In everyday terms, staged handoffs speed things up, whether you're shipping shoes or data packets. Military thinkers still find useful lessons in mobility, intelligence gathering, and flexible command. He emphasized rapid movement, communication across distances, and delegated authority to trusted commanders, ideas that resonate with modern doctrine stressing rapid deployment and decentralized decision-making. Armies now use aircraft and satellites instead of horses and mounted messengers, but the underlying logic, move fast, keep lines of communication open and empower local commanders, remains familiar. That's why some staff colleges mention steppe strategies when teaching maneuver warfare, though always translated into contemporary terms. It's like taking a classic recipe and cooking it with new ingredients. Soft power and cultural diplomacy borrow his image too, often in ways that create tension. Different states interpret the same past in ways that suit present needs. Cultural exports, museum exhibits, and even school curricula become stages where interpretations are debated. In some regions the memory of steppe rule is celebrated as a unifying founder story, elsewhere it is a reminder of conquest and suffering. This duality shapes diplomatic tone. Officials tread carefully when referencing the past in international talks, because what is praise in one capital can be a provocation in another. A souvenir mug in a tourist shop can spark a scholarly debate in a parliament, such as the unpredictability of symbols. Practical civic planning sometimes channels those echoes as well. Frontier administration historically required networks of local administration, communication hubs, and systems to integrate diverse peoples. Modern states confronting remote border regions borrow similar principles: invest in roads, clinics, and schools, connect isolated communities to national markets, and build incentives for trade. The logic is simple and ordinary. You don't unify a region by decree alone, you do it by making daily life easier. An engineer fixing a rural bridge today performs the same civic function as an ancient relay post keeper, albeit with a harder hat and better coffee. Finally, public memory matters for identity politics and economic strategy. Corporations market heritage products, governments curate national narratives, and travel agencies sell stories as much as destinations. Sometimes the effect is lighthearted, a themed restaurant serving steppe stew with a cheeky mascot. Other times it steers serious policy, shaping education, tourism priorities, and regional cooperation projects. All of these ripples are examples of how a distant past continues to shape practical choices in diplomacy, economics, and everyday life. It's a reminder that history is not only something in books, it's part of the toolkit nations still use when they build bridges, sign treaties, or pitch their country to the world. A lullaby of empire. A ruler who wanted order across miles of grass and dust did more than fight. He set down rules, messengers and ways to keep people moving safely, and those measures read less like speeches and more like a lullaby, steady, repeated, comforting. The code known as Yasa acted like household rules for an entire people, simple commands to keep riders, traders, and neighbors from squabbling in ways that would break the pace of daily life. The postal relay called the Yam was a series of stations and horses so messages and goods could travel fast and reliably, much like passing a basket of bread from hand to hand at a family dinner. He also adopted a written script for official use, so orders and records could be shared clearly, and welcomed specialists from many lands to run workshops and offices, which is a bit like hiring the best baker in town rather than insisting your cousin make the bread. Those practical systems smoothed the bumps of empire and made routine feel like a refrain. When trade routes were policed and stopped being dangerous, merchants could sleep easier at inns and wake to buyers waiting. That reliable rhythm encouraged caravans to come more often, bringing new foods, textiles and ideas. Bringing skilled potters, metalworkers and scribes into the administrative fold meant cities grew as places of craft and learning, not just tents and campfires. And because promotion was often based on skill rather than birth, think promoting the best rider to lead a relay rather than the eldest son, the organization gained efficiency, and people tended to trust it more. It's like choosing the best coach for a team, the team plays better and the crowd quiets down. Religious tolerance was another soft note in the lullaby, allowing priests and monks, rabbis and imams, shamans and elders to continue their practices so long as they paid their taxes and kept the peace. That flexibility kept local traditions alive, which helped conquered peoples feel less like newcomers in a strange household and more like members who could keep a favorite chair. The state also absorbed valuable artisans and administrators from conquered regions, putting them to work running markets, minting coins and managing records, much as a new neighbor might be invited to handle the garden because they know a thing or two about roses. Little practical moves like these reduced friction, and when friction is low, life runs on a gentler, more predictable cycle. So the lullaby was not only gentle words but the hum of systems, laws, messengers, trades, and skilled hands, that let a vast collection of peoples breathe easier under one canopy. Picture a slow cadence, horse hooves on the trail, a quill scratching on paper, the clink of a potter's wheel. Together they make a soft rhythm that encourages rest. Even empires need bedtime routines. Breathe in that steadiness, listen to the soft ordering of things, and it's easier to drift off under a sky wide enough to hold 1,000 stories. In short, this is how a boy from the wide, windy steppe, that open grassy plain where horses run like the wind, became Genghis Khan. He grew up facing loss and hardship, learned to bring people together like a coach building a team, used fast, clever tactics with horse archers. Think of it as a very mobile relay race, set clear rules and rewards so skill mattered more than family ties, a simple kind of fairness called meritocracy, and built roads and messenger relays that let ideas and goods travel far. He could be fierce, yes, but he also made room for different beliefs and helped the Silk Road hum with trade, like opening a crossroads where spices, stories, and inventions met. Imagine a giant, slow-turning pot where a lot of different ingredients simmer together. Some flavors are sharp, some are sweet, and the mix changes the whole recipe of history. You've listened with gentle curiosity, and thank you. Your calm attention helps these distant winds feel closer. Take a slow breath in, and let your shoulders drop as you picture the steppe's wide sky. If a tiny smile appears thinking of a rider who never needed a taxi, that's okay. If you enjoyed this quiet passage through time, tap subscribe or follow to drift with us again. Soon we'll travel deeper into the Mongol world, from the changing rule under Kublai Khan to the busy markets of the Silk Road, more soft stories, simple explanations, and a touch of humor waiting for you. Rest now, let the memory of open grass and steady hooves carry you into sleep.